The smell of burnt sugar and cheap cologne choked the air as she laughed, turning away from me, her hand already in his. My own engagement ring, a simple silver band I'd bought with my first engineering bonus, lay on the sticky bar top, abandoned. "You're still young," he drawled, his eyes cold as ice. "You need a reliable man." The plane ride back from Balad felt short, unnervingly so. The quiet of the Midwest plains, stretching flat and endless outside the car window, was louder than any firefight. Every normal sound, a dog barking down the street, the distant rumble of a tractor, even the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, jarred Frank Miller. 2 tours in Iraq had stripped away the comfort of silence, replacing it with a constant, low-grade hum of vigilance. He was home, but home felt like a costume he couldn't quite fit into anymore. The familiar brick of his childhood house looked the same, yet the air around it felt thin, alien. His old room, with its dusty baseball trophies and faded posters, might as well have been a museum exhibit. Steve Carlson, his closest buddy from the unit, clapped him on the shoulder one evening at the local tavern, the clinking of glasses a dull counterpoint to their conversation. "Another beer, Miller? We'll drink till we forget everything but our names, Steve's grin didn't quite reach his eyes. A shared weariness settled between them like the smoke drifting from the pool table. Frank just nodded, the cold glass of small comfort in his hand. They both understood the grim humor, the silent pact to numb what couldn't be spoken. Frank knew he needed a new mission. Something to occupy the hours, to build instead of dismantle. Engineering school seemed a practical choice, a path to a stable life that had no place for desert dust or the distant echo of mortars. He enrolled in the community college, the textbooks heavy and foreign in his hands, a stark contrast to the weight of a rifle. The routine, the equations, the quiet hum of the library, it all felt like an elaborate disguise, a performance of normalcy. One Tuesday afternoon, his beat-up '98 Ford Ranger, a relic he'd bought before his first deployment, coughed its last just a mile from campus. Smoke billowed from under the hood, a final dramatic sigh. He pushed it the rest of the way to Brenda Peterson's Auto Repair, a small, unassuming shop tucked behind a diner. He'd seen the sign for years but never paid it much mind. A woman emerged from under a lifted pickup, wiping grease from her brow with the back of a hand. Brenda Peterson. Her overalls were stained, her hands strong, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She met his gaze, a smudge of oil along her jawline, and a sharp, appraising look in her eyes. "Well, what have we got here?" she asked, her voice low and even, a hint of something resilient beneath it. Frank explained the smoke and the sputter. She listened, her head tilted, then walked around the truck, her eyes scanning. "Sounds like you've got a busted timing belt," she stated, her diagnosis swift and confident, without even popping the hood. She knew her stuff. They spent the next hour talking, first about the truck, then about everything else. She asked about his service, not with pity, but with a genuine curiosity that surprised him. He found himself telling her small pieces, the easy stories, the ones that didn't wake him up in a sweat. She, in turn, told him about growing up around engines, about her father teaching her every bolt and gasket. Her laughter was quick, unforced, and for the first time in months, Frank felt a strange pull of ease, a quiet fascination. The air in her cluttered office, smelling of oil and old coffee, felt less alien than his own living room. When the conversation lulled, Frank cleared his throat. "Coffee sometime?" The question felt clumsy, out of practice. Brenda grinned, a flash of white against the grease on her cheek. "Thought you'd never ask, soldier boy." Their relationship became a whirlwind, a powerful counterpoint to the controlled silence Frank had built around himself. Weekends were spent driving the back roads, windows down, Brenda pointing out things he'd never noticed. A particular stand of oak trees, the way the light hit the cornfields at dusk. Laughter came easier, punctuated by passionate, clumsy kisses under moonlit skies. She listened to his nightmares without flinching, held him when the cold sweats came, and patiently heard the war stories he'd only ever shared with Steve. Brenda was steady, a clear anchor in the drifting current of his life. 2 years later, they married in a small ceremony at the town hall, Steve as his best man. Frank looked at Brenda, her simple white dress, her strong, capable hands, and he knew, truly knew, he had finally found his place. The restlessness quieted, replaced by a deep, abiding sense of belonging. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Frank landed an engineering job with a local manufacturing plant, designing components for agricultural machinery. Brenda continued at the auto shop, her business thriving, the garage always busy with the rumble of engines. 3 years had folded themselves into the comfortable rhythm of their marriage. Frank Miller was settling in, the ghosts of Iraq receding to the quieter corners of his mind, replaced by the everyday concerns of an engineering job and a wife who understood the silent places within him. Then the call came, a Tuesday afternoon, from his mother, her voice thin and reedy. His father, a man who had navigated the rice paddies of Vietnam and then the cornfields of Iowa with equal stoicism, was gone. A sudden quiet heart attack in his armchair. A peaceful end to a life that had known its share of violence. The funeral was a blur of dark suits and crisp military uniforms. The flag on the casket, folded with practiced precision, spoke of a different kind of service, a different war. But the shared experience connected Frank to his father more profoundly than words ever could. The brass notes of taps hung in the cool autumn air, a haunting farewell. Next to him, Brenda squeezed his hand, her grip firm and steady. "He was so proud of you, Frank," she whispered, her voice a warm current in the chill of grief. He barely nodded, his throat tight, but the comfort was a palpable thing, a quiet reassurance in the overwhelming sadness. A week later, the lawyer's office was quiet, smelling of old paper and dust. Frank and his mother sat across from a man with thinning hair and thick-rimmed glasses, who read from a heavy document. Frank was still processing the loss, but then the numbers started to surface, sharp and unexpected. His father had left him the house, the same two-story home Frank had grown up in, and a life insurance policy, a sum of $350,000. Frank blinked, the numbers feeling abstract, unreal. His father had always been frugal, a man who fixed rather than replaced, and this unexpected generosity felt like a final, weighty gift. Brenda gasped softly beside him, her eyes wide. She reached for his hand across the polished desk. "Frank," she breathed, her voice a little shaky, "do you know what this means? We could start a family." The words hung in the air, sudden and potent. Frank felt a familiar tightening in his chest, a cautious reflex. He had always imagined a family, a quieter version of his own childhood, but the thought of it now, propelled by such a large, unexpected sum, felt like a rush. "Let's not rush into anything," he said, his voice calmer than he felt, trying to anchor them both. "We need to think about this." They talked for hours that night, sitting at their kitchen table, the inheritance making the air feel thick with possibilities. They decided eventually to put most of it into a solid savings account, a bedrock for their future. But they allowed themselves some splurges, careful allowances for what Frank called quality of life improvements. For Brenda, it was a complete kitchen remodel, replacing the faded linoleum and laminate counters with granite and gleaming stainless steel, a space she'd always dreamed of for her cooking. For Frank, it was a new Harley-Davidson Softail, a sleek black machine that hummed beneath him on the open road, the wind a clean, forgetful rush against his face. The money made their lives smoother, easier. They took vacations, a quiet week in a cabin up north, a trip out west to see the mountains. They upgraded the landscaping around the house, painted the living room, bought new furniture that actually matched. Their life unfolded in a series of pleasant improvements, a steady ascent into what felt like perfection. Frank felt secure, a deep, solid confidence settling in his bones. Their shared dreams, the ones they talked about on those long drives, seemed within reach now. Their future was not just planned, it felt set, etched in the rich soil of the Midwest. The peace that settled over them was profound, almost too good. A quiet hum in the background of their Midwestern lives, a low thrum of contentment that sometimes in the dead of night felt almost fragile. It was a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that usually blurred into all the other ordinary weekdays. Frank had a late morning dentist appointment, a routine checkup, and decided to take the rest of the day off. The hum of the drill, the minty taste of toothpaste, it all felt pleasantly mundane. He was home by 2 o'clock, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the driveway. He was just pulling his truck in when he saw Brenda's car, her sensible sedan, backing out of their shared garage. A prickle of unease went through him. She should have been at the auto shop, hands deep in some engine, smelling of oil and steel. Her shop was usually buzzing at this hour. He paused, his hand still on the ignition, watching her turn out of the driveway, heading away from town, not towards it. The unease sharpened into a cold, hard knot in his stomach. It wasn't an accusation, not yet, just a feeling, a subtle wrongness in the rhythm of their day. He pulled back onto the street, his decision made in the space of a breath. He followed her, keeping a careful distance, the engineer's mind already working, trying to construct innocent scenarios. Maybe she was picking up a part for a customer, a specialty item from a supplier across town. Maybe she was going to look at a new piece of equipment for the shop. The rationalizations felt thin, flimsy. She drove across town, past the familiar downtown square, past the small park where they sometimes walk their imaginary dog. She kept going, out towards the highway, where the businesses thinned out and the signs grew larger, brighter, more desperate. Frank's heart began to hammer. A slow, heavy drum beat against his ribs. Then she turned, left into the parking lot of the Sunset Motel. The sign, faded and peeling, advertised vacancies and cable TV, a place of transient stays, of anonymous encounters. Frank's stomach dropped, a sickening lurch. He knew then, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this wasn't about car parts or new equipment. He parked his truck across the street, behind a cluster of overgrown bushes, turning off the engine. The silence inside the cab was deafening. He watched her, a woman he knew as intimately as he knew himself, walk with a confident stride towards one of the ground floor rooms. She knocked once, sharply. The door opened and she disappeared inside. Frank sat stunned, the sun warm on his face but a coldness spreading through his chest. He tried to deny it, to push it away, to rebuild his flimsy rationalizations. A client? A friend in trouble? But the Sunset Motel was not a place for innocent meetings. It was a place for secrets. Minutes bled into hours. The sun shifted, the shadows lengthened. The grim reality settled in, heavy and unyielding. His wife, Brenda, was inside that room with another man. The thought was a physical blow, a sudden sharp pain that stole his breath. He had built his life on her, on their shared dreams, on the quiet understanding between them. Was it all a lie? Finally, the door opened. Brenda emerged, smoothing her hair, a small, private smile playing on her lips. Behind her, a man stepped out. Todd Anderson, the electrician who had rewired their newly remodeled kitchen, who had joked with them over coffee at their own kitchen table, who had admired Brenda's new granite countertops. He was taller than Frank, a little heavier, with a shock of sandy hair and a confident, easy grin. They stood there, in the open, in the harsh afternoon light. Todd pulled Brenda into a casual embrace, a lingering kiss that left no room for doubt. Then, as she turned to walk to her car, he reached out and playfully swatted her backside. A crude, intimate gesture. Brenda laughed, a light, carefree sound that Frank had once loved. She drove away, her car pulling out of the lot, oblivious to the truck parked across the street, oblivious to her husband watching, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, his carefully constructed life crumbling around him. 1,000 painful thoughts raced through his mind, sharp fragments of betrayal. How long? Was every easy laugh, every shared meal, every comforting word a performance? Was their entire history a lie? The soldier in him, the part that had learned to analyze and plan under pressure, began to take over. The raw emotion, the gut-wrenching pain, was there, a deep throb. But underneath it, a colder, more methodical mind began to work. No, he wouldn't confront here, not here, not like this. He would wait. He would give her the chance. He would give her the opportunity to come clean, to explain, to offer some sliver of truth before he detonated the whole thing. The drive home from the Sunset Motel was a slow, agonizing crawl. Each mile stretched out, a torturous marathon of self-control. Frank gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, forcing himself to breathe, to keep the truck at a steady speed. He had to prepare, to put on the mask of normalcy. He parked in the garage, the familiar scent of oil and gasoline doing nothing to calm his nerves. He walked inside, the silence of the empty house pressing in. He went straight to the shower, letting the hot water sluice over him, washing away the dust of the day, but doing nothing for the grime of betrayal that clung to him. He changed into fresh clothes, then headed to the kitchen. Dinner. He had to make dinner. A pot of spaghetti, a familiar, mindless task. He stirred the simmering sauce, the aroma of tomatoes and herbs filling the air, a cruel parody of domestic comfort. Precisely at 5:30, the garage door rumbled open, then closed. The familiar sound of Brenda's car, her footsteps light and quick, approaching the kitchen. "Honey, I'm home," she called out, her voice cheerful, oblivious. Frank forced a smile onto his face, a brittle, fragile thing. She walked into the kitchen, threw her keys onto the counter, and leaned in for a kiss. Her lips, soft against his cheek, felt alien, tainted. He fought the urge to flinch, to pull away, holding himself rigid. She began to chatter, peeling an onion for a side salad, her words flowing easily. She talked about a busted alternator she'd fixed, a new tire order, the usual rhythm of the auto shop. "Oh, same old, she said, not looking at him. "Nothing exciting, just another Tuesday." She peered into the spaghetti pot. "Smells good, Frank." His stomach churned. The charade felt like a suffocating blanket. They sat down at the kitchen table, the clinking of forks against plates the only sound for a long moment. Frank picked at his food, the taste like ash in his mouth. He couldn't do it. He couldn't let another minute of this lie pass. The carefully constructed plan to wait, to give her a chance, evaporated under the weight of her casual deception. He put down his fork, his heart pounding, a cold, hard knot in his gut. He tried to sound casual, to keep his voice level, but the words felt thick on his tongue. "Anything interesting happened today, Brenda?" She looked up, twirling a strand of spaghetti around her fork, not quite meeting his eyes. "Not really. Why do you ask?" Her voice was light, too light. "No reason," he shrugged, forcing a casualness he didn't feel. "Just curious about your day, like any husband." She looked up again, and this time he saw it. A flicker, a flash of something like fear or maybe guilt in her eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a smooth, almost defensive composure. She put her fork down, the gesture deliberate. "Frank," she said, her voice dropping a notch, "is something wrong? You're acting weird." He took a deep breath, the air cold in his lungs. This was it. The moment he had dreaded, the moment he had to break the peace. He met her gaze, held it. His voice, when it came, was flat, devoid of emotion. A soldier reporting facts. "I saw you today, Brenda, at the Sunset Motel, with Todd Anderson." The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, ashen white. Her jaw went slack. She stared at him, her eyes wide, unblinking, like a deer caught in headlights. The silence in the kitchen was absolute, thick with accusation. Then, to his utter disbelief, a small, nervous laugh escaped her, a brittle, high-pitched sound that grated on his ears. "Oh, honey," she said, shaking her head, a practiced exasperation in her tone. "Is that what this is about? You should have just asked me, Frank. You really should have just asked." The sound of Brenda's laughter, that nervous, dismissive titter, hit Frank like a punch to the gut. His carefully constructed calm shattered. "Games, Brenda?" he asked, his voice low, a tremor of pure anger running through it. "I saw you. I saw you kissing him. I saw him touch you." The words were like sharp edges in the quiet kitchen. Her composure, however, remained remarkably intact. She blinked, a slight frown creasing her brow. "Frank, honestly, you're being ridiculous. Todd and I were discussing some new electrical upgrades for the shop. He needed to show me some schematics, and his office was busy. We just went to the Motel coffee shop. It was quiet." She shook her head, a practiced exasperation. "He was just showing me some new electrical schematics for the shop." "You're paranoid, honey." The lie hung in the air, thick and rancid. Frank looked at her, truly looked at her. Her eyes, usually so open and honest, now held a guarded quality, a subtle shift that spoke volumes. The betrayal of the affair was one thing, a raw wound. But this calculated fabrication, this attempt to manipulate him with a flimsy, transparent lie felt deeper, more insidious. It was an insult to his intelligence, a cold design. "I know you're lying, Brenda," he stated, the quiet conviction in his voice cutting through her performance. The words were not an accusation. They were a fact. The air in the kitchen grew heavy. She flinched, her mouth closing, the flippant smile finally dissolving. The silence that followed was absolute. "I want a divorce," he said, the words clean, precise, like a surgical cut. She stared at him, unblinking, then a slow realization dawned in her eyes. The flippancy, the practiced calm, vanished. Fear crept in, clouding her face. "Frank, no, you don't mean that. This is just a misunderstanding. Please." She reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as it hovered near his. "I'm sorry, Frank. Whatever you think you saw, I can explain. Please don't say that." She began to plead, her voice losing its edge, becoming softer, more desperate. But his resolve was set. The soldier in him, once again, had taken over, locking down emotion, focusing on the objective. The next morning, the first thing Frank did was call Mr. Davies, his lawyer, a shrewd man with a reputation for meticulous detail. Mr. Davies listened patiently, making notes, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "This isn't just about emotions, Frank," Mr. Davies said, leaning forward across his cluttered desk. "It's about assets, about protecting what's yours, what your father left you." He advised Frank on collecting evidence discreetly. "We need proof, concrete proof, photos, dates, teams, the more the better. And don't tip your hand. Don't let her know you're building a case." Frank became a shadow. He started leaving work early, parking his truck down the street from the auto shop, watching. He bought a small, high-resolution camera, a cold, clinical tool. His days became a meticulous schedule of engineering work, followed by covert surveillance. He observed Brenda's routine, the subtle shifts, the unexplained absences. He quickly discovered her regular rendezvous with Todd Anderson. The Sunset Motel was not a one-time thing. It was a pattern, a quiet, shameful habit. He documented it all. The clandestine meetings, the furtive glances, the shared kisses in public spaces, the stolen moments in the motel parking lot. Each click of the camera was a stab to his chest, each photo a stark betrayal of the woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with. The emotional toll was immense. It was a constant dull ache, a heavy weight in his chest. But his military discipline, honed in the deserts of Iraq, kept him focused. He detached himself, compartmentalized the pain. This was a mission now, a strategic objective. He had to secure his position, protect his future. He had to fight for what was his, what his father had intended for him. He thought of the house, of the money, of the quiet life he had imagined for them. All of it now threatened, sullied. It was a cold, hard battle, and he was prepared to wage it. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The stack of photos and the neatly compiled log of dates and times felt heavy in Frank's hands. He laid them out on Mr. Davies' desk, the images stark and undeniable under the office light. Mr. Davies, ever composed, examined each one, a slight nod of his head marking his approval. "This is conclusive, Frank," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "This evidence will secure a favorable divorce settlement. It will protect your inheritance and ensure a clear division of assets in your favor." The lawyer's words were a cold comfort, a logical outcome to an illogical betrayal. Frank decided it was time. He called Brenda, his voice even, devoid of any discernible emotion. He told her he'd made an appointment with his lawyer, Mr. Davies, and that she should be there. He kept the reason vague, simply stating, "We need to discuss our future." She agreed, a hesitant note in her voice, probably hoping for a discussion about reconciliation, about fixing things. She arrived at Mr. Davies' office promptly, her hair carefully styled, a tentative smile on her face. She looked at Frank, then at Mr. Davies, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But Frank offered no warmth, no opening. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension, a cold formality that Brenda clearly hadn't anticipated. Mr. Davies wasted no time. He began in his calm, measured tone to lay out the evidence. He described the surveillance, the dates, the times, the specific locations. Then he pushed the folder of photographs across the table towards her. Brenda's eyes widened as she saw them. The Sunset Motel, Todd's arm around her, the casual kiss, the hand on her back. Each image was a hammer blow, shattering her defiant facade. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and ghostly. Shock replaced the tentative smile, followed by a flush of deep, undeniable shame. "How could you, Frank?" she whispered, her voice cracking, barely audible. "You spied on me? You hired someone to spy on me?" Her eyes, now wide with disbelief and hurt, accused him. "I watched you, Brenda," Frank corrected, his voice flat, emotionless. "I saw the truth." He offered no further explanation, no defense. The truth was stark enough. The fight left her then. Her shoulders slumped. Her hands, which had been clutching the edge of the table, slowly fell to her lap. She looked at the photos again, then back at Frank, a single tear tracing a path through the faint blush on her cheek. I've been seeing Todd," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "For a few months. It just happened, Frank. I don't know why." Her words trailed off, weak and unconvincing. Mr. Davies, without missing a beat, slid a thick stack of papers across the table. Divorce papers. He began to outline the terms, the legal ramifications of her infidelity. He spoke of asset division, of spousal support, of the distribution of the inheritance Frank had received from his father. The numbers, stark and unyielding, painted a grim picture for Brenda. The house, the majority of the savings, the bulk of the inheritance, all would remain with Frank. Her share would be significantly reduced, reflecting her actions. As Mr. Davies continued, Brenda's eyes fixed on Frank, a desperate plea in their depths. She began to speak, her voice choked with tears, reminding him of their history, of their dreams, of the life they had built together. "Please, Frank," she cried, reaching out her hand, a raw, unadulterated plea. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll stop seeing him, I swear. Just please don't do this to us. Don't throw everything away." Frank looked at her, truly looked at her. Her pleading, her tears, her sudden remorse, all of it felt too late, too calculated. The betrayal had carved a chasm between them, deep and impassable. His heart, once so open to her, had hardened beyond repair. He said nothing, simply met her gaze with an unwavering, cold resolve. The man who had once built a life with her was gone, replaced by a soldier who saw only the objective. Brenda tried to reconcile after that meeting, after the papers were served. She called, she texted, she even showed up at the house, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She begged Frank for another chance, for them to talk, to fix what she called a mistake. She tried to move it back in, pulling her car into the driveway as if nothing had changed. But Frank had already changed the locks. A cold, definitive statement. He met her at the door, his face impassive. "It's over, Brenda," he told her, his voice flat, allowing no room for argument. "There's no going back." The words hung between them, as final as a closed casket. With Brenda dealt with, or at least in the process of being dealt with, Frank's focus shifted. Todd Anderson, the man who had entered his life as an electrician, then as a silent destroyer. Frank believed in a price for every action. Todd had taken more than just a passing fancy. He had taken a piece of Frank's life, his marriage, his sense of security. He would pay. Frank started by making discreet inquiries, leveraging casual conversations with mutual acquaintances. He learned that Todd, much like Frank himself, had ambitions. He dreamed of expanding his small electrical business, moving beyond residential repairs to larger commercial contracts. He had recently secured a small business loan, a significant investment in his future. The details were small pieces of a puzzle, fitting neatly into place. A few days later, Frank drove his truck to Todd's garage, a nondescript building on the industrial edge of town. He presented himself as a potential client, an engineer from a local plant, needing significant electrical work done on a new production line. He walked into the shop, the smell of grease and solder familiar, almost comforting in its honesty. Todd emerged from under a hood, wiping his hands on a rag. Nisanemki, his sandy hair falling across his forehead. He recognized Frank, a flicker of something, surprise, maybe a hint of guilt, in his eyes, quickly masked by a professional smile. Frank Miller, isn't it? Long time no see. What can I do for you? His voice was smooth, a little too easy. Frank returned the smile, a thin, polite curve of his lips. Todd, yeah, I've got a project that might be too big for my usual guy. He feigned interest in Todd's capabilities, letting his gaze sweep across the shop. He noted the layout, the security cameras, or lack thereof, and most importantly, the electrical panels, the wiring running through the walls, an engineer's eye assessing vulnerabilities. He spent a good hour talking to Todd, asking about his plans, his vision for the business. This place could really take off, Frank mused, subtly flattering Todd's ambition, feeding his ego. With the right investment, the right push, you could be handling some major contracts. Todd, completely oblivious to the true intentions behind Frank's polite interest, puffed up. He bragged about his upcoming projects, the new equipment he planned to buy, the small business loan that was going to make it all possible. He talked about his dreams, his future, laying it all out for Frank, a unwitting roadmap. Well, Schreiss, Frank said, leaning back against a workbench, a thoughtful look on his face. There are always ways to accelerate success, aren't there? Sometimes a little, strategic planning is all it takes. The words hung in the air, a veiled offer that Todd misinterpreted as a hint of collaboration, a potential partnership. Frank left Todd's shop an hour later, the hum of the overhead lights echoing in his ears. The cold, calculated plan was already forming in his mind, precise and detailed. He felt no remorse, no hesitation. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about balance, about ensuring that a price was paid, a vow honored. Frank's plan took shape in the quiet hours, an intricate design of retribution. It wasn't about violence. It was about destruction, precise and debilitating, aimed at Todd Anderson's most vulnerable point, his business. Frank, an engineer by trade, understood systems, understood how to find the weak points, how to orchestrate a failure that looked like an unfortunate accident. He began to gather specific materials, components that could be repurposed, subtly altered. He spent hours researching electrical schematics for older commercial buildings, the kind Todd's shop occupied. He learned about voltage tolerances, insulation breakdown, the precise conditions under which a seemingly innocuous fault could escalate into something catastrophic. His hands, usually so adept at crafting and repairing, now worked with a colder purpose. The execution was discreet, carried out under the cover of night. Frank, using the knowledge gleaned from his client visit, bypassed the inadequate security. He knew exactly where the main electrical panel was, the specific circuits that fed critical areas of the shop. He made his adjustments, subtle enough to escape initial detection, designed to fail at a specific delayed interval. The goal was substantial damage, a complete ruin of inventory and equipment, but not a threat to life. It had to look like a tragic accident, a faulty wire or a system overload in an old building. For the night the damage was set to occur, Frank established a solid alibi. He arranged to be out of town, a short fishing trip with Steve Carlson, far enough away to be beyond suspicion. He made sure to be seen, to have witnesses. The timing was crucial, a carefully calculated delay built into his sabotage, ensuring he was miles away when the first sparks flew. The call came a few days later, while Frank was still up north. Steve, looking over Frank's shoulder as he checked his phone, pointed to a local news alert, a devastating fire at Todd Anderson's electrical shop. The accompanying photos showed a skeletal shell of a building, smoke still curling from charred remains. Inventory, equipment, the dreams Todd had bragged about, all reduced to ash and rubble. A week later, the official report from the fire marshal confirmed Frank's design. Accidental cause, the report read, likely due to aged wiring and an unforeseen electrical surge, just as he intended. Todd's business, already reliant on that new loan for expansion, was utterly ruined. Insurance would cover some, but not nearly enough to rebuild. He was left with significant debt, his future plans shattered. Brenda called, her voice tight with distress, a few days after the news broke. She had heard about the fire, about Todd's misfortune. Poor Todd, she sobbed, her words thick with tears. He's lost everything, Frank. His shop, all his equipment. It's just awful. She sounded genuinely heartbroken, a stark contrast to her calculated calm in Mr. Davies's office. Frank maintained his calm, sympathetic facade. That's rough, Brenda, he said, his voice even, laced with just the right amount of feigned concern. Sometimes bad luck just strikes. Nothing anyone can do about it. He offered a few more platitudes, a hollow performance of empathy. He hung up the phone, the silence of his rented cabin broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. A grim satisfaction settled over him, cold and hard. His revenge had been exacted. A precise, calculated justice, served in the desolate landscape of consequences. The balance had been restored. The divorce proceeded with the cold efficiency Mr. Davies had promised. Frank secured the majority of his father's inheritance and their shared marital assets. Brenda was left with little, the financial consequences of her affair now fully apparent, a stark mirroring of her choices. She became increasingly withdrawn, isolated. Her auto shop, once a source of pride, struggled. Frank saw her occasionally in town, a ghost of her former vibrant self, her eyes hollow, the familiar spark extinguished. One rainy afternoon she called, "Frank, please, just one last time." He met her at a quiet diner, the clatter of plates the only witness. She sat across from him, her hands clasped on the worn formica, desperation etched on her face. "Was this worth it, Frank?" she asked, her voice thin, a vague gesture at their ruined lives. Was it worth destroying everything? He looked at her. He saw the woman he had once loved, but overlaid was the indelible image of the Sunset Motel, the casual kiss, Todd's hand. He saw only the betrayal. "You started it, Brenda," he replied, his voice lacking warmth or regret. "I just finished it." She broke down then, a quiet, guttural sob that drew no attention from the scattered diners. The full weight of her actions, the price she'd paid, finally settled. Frank rose and left the diner, walking out into the flat Midwestern light. There was no triumph, no peace. The house was quiet, the future he had imagined with Brenda now just an empty space. He knew he'd paid a price too, not of money but of something deeper, something in the heart. The lingering question remained, a persistent echo in the silence. What does a man become when he pays the price for another's betrayal? The dust settled, not just on the plains, but inside Frank Miller. The legal proceedings concluded, leaving him with the house and the inheritance, a victory that felt more hollow than triumphant. Brenda, now a distant figure, was simply a woman he occasionally passed in town, her shop sign faded, her eyes vacant, a ghost of the vibrant woman she once was. Their last exchange in the diner echoed in his mind, a finality that offered no closure, only a stark acknowledgement of what had been lost. He had finished what she started, a logical progression of cause and effect, he told himself. Yet the quiet of his home, once filled with the promise of a shared future, was now just quiet. The Harley sat in the garage, gleaming under the fluorescent light, a symbol of a freedom he didn't quite feel. He'd exacted his price, secured his assets, but the cost felt heavier than anticipated. The soldier's discipline had seen him through the campaign of revenge, but it had left something behind, something cold and unyielding, where warmth once resided. He looked out at the familiar Midwestern landscape, flat and unchanging, and wondered what truly remained of the man who had loved, fought, and now, finally, avenged. The silence held no answers, only the lingering question of what had truly been gained.